This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by corporate board member and host NYSE Euronext, along with governance knowledge partner Paul Weiss and contributing partners National Investor Relations Institute and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. I'm TK Kerstetter with Corporate Board Member, and we've got a great show for you today talking about a subject that's very sensitive to boardrooms, and that's executive compensation, and particularly the Compensation Committee. And it's my pleasure to welcome my guests today, and that's Marsha Everton, who's the Compensation Chair for the Bon-Ton stores. Marsha, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, it's no surprise that, as we say in the title here, that the committee is under the microscope. It used to be the audit committee that everybody was sensitive to and felt that was under such scrutiny, but that has been replaced by the Compensation Committee. And first of all, let's give a perspective. Why don't you just spend a second talking about, in addition to the Bon-Ton stores, I know you serve on some private boards as well, but just talk a little bit about, again, your time on the Bon-Ton store as chair, and again, what seemed to be the biggest challenges that you've had relative to being the comp chair.
Yeah. Well, I've been on what we call our Human Resources and Compensation Committee for 5 years, and 4 of those years, the last 4 years, I served as chair. And really the biggest challenge for us on the committee, and certainly for me as chair, has been dealing with the volatility in the economy, in the markets, and being in a highly stressed industry. It's very difficult to determine fair compensation for your executives in that kind of environment. And
this year was particularly interesting because out of Dodd-Frank we had the mandated say on pay. So was that a challenge at all for your committee or your organization this year?
It was a challenge, but in many ways we looked at Dodd-Frank and the reforms as just being the new normal that we needed to deal with. And early on we decided to just adopt the basic tenets of Dodd-Frank into our initiatives and get it behind us so that we could focus more on the strategy of the company and the human resources that were needed to implement that strategy.
Well, it's got to be a benefit to put things behind you so that you don't, agendas are so full now that it seems to be some benefit to just accept, that this is sort of the playing field that we have, and let's move on and find out how we can maneuver within that field.
Well, that was certainly our perspective. So, for example, with regard to say on pay, early on, and it was very honestly a relatively short discussion, we decided to go straight to an annual review for say on pay and just make it part of our processes.
Well, we've certainly seen that. We know now that with the pressures that are from interest groups and whatever, that we will be doing this on an annual basis, or at least most companies will be doing it on an annual basis. Let me take a little twist in asking you something. It seems to me that in the old days it was fine to have maybe somebody on the committee that really understood comp, very well. But today, you really need a committee that understands with this complex and all the issues. It's important for the chair to have a very qualified committee. Do you find that that's a challenge on getting members on the comp committee that really do understand compensation?
Well, when we are looking at our committee structure, both when I'm working on it as chair, but also within our governance and nominating committee at Bon-Ton, what we look at is the entire set of skills, really a matrix that we want on each committee. And certainly on the Human Resources Compensation Committee, we do want some human resources expertise. Not necessarily in-depth expertise on the part of the chair, but at least someone on that committee who has some relevant experience in depth. But we also look for someone who is a good skeptic, which we think is very important, who can ask really good questions. And certainly in your chair role, you want someone who can bring together the different points of view, can reach out to external consultants when you need them, and to bring it all together for a good, constructive, sometimes argumentative, but good, constructive dialogue with regard to the issues that the committee is dealing with.
So there's the opportunity to have a broader range of skills, and as long as you have somebody on that committee that really understands all the nuances, because I think that was part of the problem in the past, that the compensation started to change with so many regulations. You had to think pretty hard of who had the experience to serve as chairman for the comp committee. So let me ask another question. As you sit there as comp chair and look into the future, and we had the chance to talk about this today in a roundtable that we did, but as you look into the future on what lies ahead that are challenges for compensation committees, particularly publicly held compensation committees like the Bon-Ton stores, what do you think are the things that compensation committees should be aware of that lie ahead in the future?
I think the biggest challenge that compensation committees and the chairs are going to face are really similar to what I mentioned as this most significant issue of the past couple of years, is continuing to deal with this volatile economy, with equity prices that are all over the place that make it very challenging when you're designing pay-for-performance programs that include equity. And you want to be fair, you want to fairly compensate your key executives. You also want to be fair and make sure that your shareholders are receiving an adequate return. And finding that balance point with that kind of volatility in the market is so challenging.
Well, I would imagine that these times just make that even more difficult when you look at the performance. I mean, compensation committees are in a difficult position because with the down market, it's tough to show shareholders much advance. Yet, in some ways, management is performing their best job in a management sense, meaning that they may have saved the shareholders tens or hundreds of millions of dollars by operating good in a down cycle. But it puts such pressure on the comp committee because the optics of rewarding them for that job well done when the company hasn't done well is a difficult optic for the comp committee.
It's a difficult optic, and we've tried to deal with that through our compensation philosophy, and we review that philosophy each year, and we remain committed to paying our key executives, to constructing programs that would pay them at target, given the information that we have available at the time when the program is put together. And then with the pay-for-performance elements, if the company does well, they do well, the shareholders do well. If not, then everyone takes the hit.
Well, we have the chance to offer some of your years of experience in the way of advice to our viewers and those that sit on comp committees like you do. So having that opportunity, what advice might you pass along to our viewers as far as tips or things that you've learned that may be helpful to them going forward?
I'd say my number one piece of advice is do everything you can to be able to focus on the strategy, because your long-term win is going to be with a good strategy, well executed, which requires great human resources. And so do everything you can to focus on delivering great talent for this company, rather than all of these regulations and things that can really become background noise if you just get on with it and move on. And in that context, I say my second piece of advice is try to keep it simple. Don't get overly complicated, because in the end, if you can explain your story, your compensation program to the school teacher who is invested in your company, then you're going to win. Everybody's going to win.
Well, keeping it simple sounds like an oxymoron in the sense of how the proxies are growing in explanations, but I think that is a super philosophy keep it simple. Good communication and execute is never a bad rule as far as performing one's duties on the board. So, Marsha Everton, thanks for your time and joining us today. We wish you good luck with the board of the Bon-Ton stores and also on your career. And that will conclude this session of This Week in the Boardroom. We hope you have enjoyed the show, and will join us again next week when we'll take a look at another key issue that will help you be a more effective director and committee member. We'll see you next week.
Join us again next week for This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by corporate board member and host NYSE Euronext, along with governance knowledge partner Paul Weiss and contributing partners National Investor Relations Institute and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.